So kia ora koutou, ko Victoria McLennan, toka wamawa, but everyone calls me Vic. I'm the CEO of IT Professionals, Te Po Hangarau Naio, and we are the industry peak body for people who work in the digital technology industry. And I'm joined today by the wonderful Paula Browning from We Create, and we're going to have a great conversation about digital tech and the creative industry and how the two of them are blending together. So welcome, Paula.
Kia ora, thanks for having me today, Vic.
Yeah, I really appreciate you giving up your time to come and talk to us. So can you kick us off by telling us a little bit about you and your potted history?
Very potted. I immigrated from the UK when I was a preschooler. Mum and Dad threw us on an ocean liner and we spent 6 weeks coming to Aotearoa. I only heard recently that it was a toss of a coin. We could have ended up in Vancouver, Canada, but we didn't. We landed here. So very fortunate to have been able to come halfway around the world before school even started. I was brought up in Mount Roskill in central Auckland, a proud graduate of Mount Roskill Grammar, where my claim to fame is being at school with Russell Crowe.
Nice.
Oh yes, Russ LaRock, as we used to call him in those days when he was doing his musical thing. Went from there to what is now AUT, but in those days was ATI, and graduated with a National Diploma in Business, and worked in the commercial world for business units within Watties and Carter Holt Harvey before having a family. And then once the girls were off to school, I went and worked in education for 7 years as a non-teacher. I was in a large central Auckland primary school looking after everything that didn't involve teaching, but it was also voted as the staff rep on the Board of Trustees, and that sort of started my governance career. Following that, went on to the sports industry, 7 years at Sport Auckland, which is the regional sports trust for Auckland City as it was then. And most of my time there, as well as looking after the business of Sport Auckland, was to educate regional sports trusts and national sports organisations on finance and governance best practice. I was also responsible for the development of Sports House, which is at Alexandra Park, the trotting ground in Epsom. We had to move out of Eden Park for the 2011 Rugby World Cup and needed another home to go to. So I developed the sports house there, and we had 12 sports organisations under the same roof. So bringing people together that thought they had nothing in common, but it turns out that they have the business of sport in common rather than the code itself. So that facility's still there and going well, which is great. And after that, I went to Copyright Licensing New Zealand, which is the collective management organisation for authors, publishers, and now visual artists as well. I was there for 12 years. And very proud of the digital transformation that we did while I was there. We went from a very paper-based organisation to end-to-end digital business with integrated software solutions. So it was quite brilliant to lead a very small team to do that within a small organisation, and then to be able to make those systems available to our customers, which was where we got the most impact from. Particularly with putting rights management in the hands of individual creatives and creative businesses. I left there about 18 months ago and now working for myself, with the intention being to spend more time with the grandchildren. I have 3 of them, 12, 4 and 19 months.
Nice.
And yeah, it's nice to have a bit of flexibility and be able to say, yes, I can have the small person while you go and do X, Y, Z. So that's a lot of fun now.
Well, thank you for that potted history. And I love the way so many of the topics we're going to talk about today are things that you've been involved in the past. So that's perfect. But before we get on to me asking you questions, can you tell us a bit about We Create and who they are?
It made me laugh when you sent this question through, and I thought about my way of answering it, because the logo for Roskill Grammar is a phoenix, and We Create is the phoenix that rose from the ashes of the Copyright Council of New Zealand.
Oh, right.
Back in 2014. So that organisation had existed, I think, for as long as the copyright legislation had been in place. But when I came into CLNZ, I couldn't quite work out why we were talking about copyright all the time, and nobody understood that that was connected to books and music and TV and games and visual art. And we were losing the message with people. And so we changed the organisation and then grew the membership. So we create some members, the membership associations. So we're an association of associations, as well as other creative businesses that operate in the creative sector. So if you look at the publishing industry, the members are the Society of Authors, Publishers Association, Copyright Licensing. With music, it's APRA, Recorded Music, Music Commission, Independent Music New Zealand. And all in all, we represent about 30,000 or through the members, represent about 30,000 creative practitioners and creative businesses.
Nice, it's a great explanation. I hadn't heard that, how it rose from the ashes before, so really good to know. So for anyone who's watching this, you're welcome to ask questions of Paula by using the Q&A function, and I will seed them into the discussion as we go. But believe me, I've got plenty of questions that are going to take up all of our time. So the first thing is to talk about our two sectors. What are some of the biggest challenges that the creative sector is currently facing?
I think, you know, that expression, nobody understands me. I think that applies to the creative sector sometimes, particularly because for We Create's purposes anyway, we're talking about the economic end of creativity. And absolutely acknowledge that the arts and culture, tech and education sectors obviously all intersect with the creative sector. But there are a number of moving parts within the sector, and the people within it move as well. We have, according to the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, Manatu Tonga, double the number of freelancers and contractors of any other sector in the economy. So it's quite often to build a creative career in that sort of fast-moving environment. You're not just working in either film or publishing or music. You can be working in all of these places, and that for people who are used to more standard vertical sectors, it's hard to understand how that all works. I draw hugely on my experience as the daughter of somebody who was self-employed for life, and understanding the business of being self-employed and how you pull together a career and an income from multiple different revenue streams, and that's definitely the case for the majority of our sector. And I was going to try and avoid talking about industry and occupation codes, but I know you'll get this, Vic. Unfortunately, the understanding that government has of the New Zealand economy comes from a thing that is a model that was developed, I think, 30 years ago, where if you're working in a digital industry, you can be a software engineer and not much else. So if you're a game developer, that's the box you tick. But it's also difficult, as I said before, for these people who are freelancers. You pretty much have to pick what were you doing for the last 4 weeks, and that becomes your occupation. Well, it doesn't really give a clear picture of exactly the type of work that's being done or the businesses that are being owned in our world. So the government doesn't have the full colour of what the sector is and does. And I think included in the challenge with that is we don't fit into any one government agency. And I know the sector is challenged with this as well, that you are, when you're engaging with government, you have to work across in a horizontal. And I remember a couple of years ago at an IOD breakfast, Grant Robertson was challenging business to be fit for purpose in the digital world. And I couldn't help myself. I said, is the government fit for purpose in the digital world? And eventually I got him to say no, because I don't think it is. And that's part of our challenge. I mean, any of us that have to, we need to work with the government in order to get the settings right to grow what we're doing. Growing that understanding of what we do and how we do it and what the opportunity is, that takes a reasonable amount of work.
I think that all resonates so well and will do for all of our members who are listening to this, all of the issues and challenges that our industry face. So thanks for that description. So let's talk a little bit about, where do you see creative and digital technologies collaborating to produce products and services, and how that's changed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious ones are, games and interactive media. Those are the ones that people sort of know. But if you look at the music industry, I mean, it's digital. I mean, it's going backwards a little bit. People are liking a bit of retro vinyl. But otherwise, I think that the big thing with digital is being able to find an audience anywhere, and hopefully a customer anywhere, where, there are different gatekeepers, but not the same barriers as they are in physical goods trade. So for a small country down the bottom of the world, being able to use the internet to export to pretty much anywhere, and to do business through using digital technologies is a massive benefit for us. And I don't know that we're taking full advantage of that yet. We do still see just a little bit too much involvement, interest, whatever we want to call it, in the traditional industries, rather than, the opportunity that creative and tech absolutely represent for the country. One of the best things, we've got some massive infrastructure challenges, but one of the best things we've done was the UFB rollout. And then, the connectivity to fibre. And I acknowledge we've still got gaps there. But, we've got more pipes going to the world, a direct line to all sorts of places that we could be doing more digital business with. And I think looking at that more closely and paying more attention, and working out what needs to be done differently than perhaps the other types of trade that we've done in the past. That's where we can make the most of the strengths that we have in creative and in tech. And it just feels like it's still thought of as new, where I'm like, actually, a couple of decades now, or maybe even more.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And I laughed about the UFB rollout, given one of our mutual colleagues who we know is watching this. She and I are writing letters to ministers at the moment about still 20% of people in Aotearoa New Zealand who don't have an internet connection, and so their ability to leverage this digital world. But that's not what we're here to talk about today, so I won't go off on a tangent. So let's talk a bit about emerging trends, and everyone's talking about AI at the moment. It's just like the only topic, and I write a weekly newsletter and I really struggle to not talk about AI every week, but there's so much going on. And this is likely to have a huge impact on the creative sector, with ethical considerations, copyright, an area that you've been involved with for a long time, ownership, impact on jobs. How do you see this period of AI adoption and its progress shaping up? And what are your biggest concerns?
I really hope we'll learn from the past. I mean, it's not like we haven't had new technology before. And, in particular, the game-changing things like the advent of the internet. We saw what happened there. We've seen it progress. We've seen what's gone wrong and what's gone right. And my concern when I hear some of the conversations about AI is, could you just look backwards and see what we've got wrong before, and let's not do that again? And it does feel like that we sort of started down that road, that with the launch of ChatGPT, everybody was doing the, oh, look, it's a sparkly new thing, let's go and play with it, without sort of thinking about the things that we should have learnt. Had the great privilege to be involved with the AI Forum and WetaFX and the BBC recently, and a conference on AI in the creative industries. And I think one of the things that came home to me from that was people not understanding that with AI, there's a difference between open and closed AI. And ChatGPT is open AI. I mean, literally so open, they scrape the internet to make it go. But
True.
businesses like the BBC and WeatherFX are using the technology, but in their own way, with their own content. And the other thing that really came home to me that I think is really important, because it's something the creative sector had already started talking about, is bringing your values into that technology with you. So if you're, like the BBC, they're using it for restoration of archive footage and images. But all of the values of the BBC around trust and authenticity and those sorts of things are being used in that system, which is not the same as what you're seeing with the more open systems. So I think there's a lot to look at from businesses like that who are doing really interesting things with the technology, that isn't about, growing massive global businesses that are looking at trillions of dollars of investment to grow even more, that have got all sorts of concerns around all of the bad stuff that we've already seen from the internet being repeated, but at even bigger scale, and causing an even bigger problem. When we got together as an industry last year, we were looking at AI for the first time, and the number one thing that the creative sector was worried about was humanity, and keeping the human in the picture of AI, and retaining that connection, and then trust and respect were the other two headlines. And I think if we can do that in New Zealand in our own AI development, that can be our USP. That can be what we take to the world. New Zealand Story has done quite good work about promoting the tech story of New Zealand, and a lot of that is about humanity, it's about culture, it's about our uniqueness, and hopefully we can do that with AI as we have done with other tech.
So I'll just stick with AI for a second before I ask you a question that's up on the Q&A. I recently read about how the democratization of creativity is coming about with new AI-powered tools, making content creation more accessible to an end user. Does the sector share this view, or is the sector concerned?
And we all have a digital tool in our hand for like 15, 20 years now. Again, it's a tool. And it's a tool for exploring things, or testing stuff. For those of us who haven't got a creative bone in our body, it might do something that we couldn't do for ourselves, but it's not going to turn me into Lisa Rayhana. It can do certain things. It's maybe a good test pot where you can have a play with stuff, but I don't know that it's going to replace the incredible creative minds that we have, because you still need to prompt it, you still need to ask it things, and what I would ask it in my boring accounting linear way is not the same as what an artist is going to do with it. And back to that humanity point as well, I think we've also reached a bit of a tipping point where a lot of people still want to be able to connect the movie they're watching, the image they're looking at, with someone who created it. And not everybody, but there's definitely still going to be a place for connecting the human with what it is that you're engaging with from a content perspective.
Nice. We've got a question here which is around localization. So Mike asks, regarding what was mentioned about digital streaming media availability, what are your thoughts about the major right holders removing content from their catalogues, making the only viable alternative to source physical media again? Unless those physical versions are already discontinued, will we lose access to our locally created content as a result of that?
Yeah. Look, I think the biggest thing facing the local industry at the moment is sustaining the jobs that make that local content. Obviously, the Warner Brothers Discovery and TVNZ conversations are challenging at the moment. I think one of the challenges we see with streaming is no different, really. I mean, it's just a new problem that replaced the old problem of geo-locking on DVDs. rights are picked up by certain companies and then made available in certain ways in certain places. And the challenge with all that is we have an expectation in the digital world that everything should be available from somewhere for all of us all of the time. And sometimes that's just it's not viable. And rights holders have to be careful about, where they're placing their work, what the return for it is, how they are distributing that work and making sure that they're earning a return on it. And it's not a very black and white world. I've been looking recently at audiobooks with the local publishing industry. Some people would say that the local industry has been slow to take up audiobooks, but actually the majority of what we publish here, which is non-fiction, doesn't go quite so well in audio as some other genre do. But again, the distribution of those audiobooks and who controls those markets is really interesting as well. And I think the general consumer, when you're looking at the likes of streaming, or you're looking at Amazon Kindle, or those digital access points, don't realize how much of a cut is taken by those platforms that reduced income for the rights holder. With Amazon, it's 30%. Others have other numbers, but like the App Store and what Apple takes from an app provider. There's no black and white side to that. We've certainly been talking to you have as well, Vic, talking to the government and about the trade settings in relation to digital trade. And one of the things that is a challenge there is it's not a country to country or a multilateral, a mixed group of countries talking about how they will operate in a shared rules environment. When you're talking about digital trade and the platforms, they're not really accountable to anybody. So, trying to get fair trade through those platforms and then a fair return for the work that's gone into creating that creative product. It's a tricky business.
Thanks. That's a really great answer, and I hope that helped Mike with his understanding. I want to move to a new topic now that we're both passionate about, which is education, and specifically talking about STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics education. So, do you want to just preface this with kind of, in your experience, why a strong foundation in STEAM education is critical for future generations and preparing them for our workforce of tomorrow?
Sure. So I think the workforce of tomorrow, we have no idea what that looks like. And we're talking about jobs that we don't know about. We're talking about industries we don't know about. And we're talking about the possible rather than the known. And what the arts does in being the A in STEAM is helps with the development of that open-mindedness and keeping the possible front and center while building on the technology that's available, or creating technology using new tools for those future industries and jobs. Which is why when I hear the expression "the future of work," I'm like, but it's here. It's not the future. In our world, it's already here. A couple of years ago, nobody heard of the job prompt engineer. Now it's a highly paid tech job or creative job, whichever way you want to look at it. But I think the other thing for me is it's a little bit personal. My youngest daughter is quite chronically dyslexic, and she found her way through education in the arts world, and is not using her creativity in art. She uses it in veterinary practice, and I think the broadening of the including arts in STEM gives more students more opportunities for success, and also means that they are fit for whatever work and industry looks like later on. I also think that the skills that are developed in STEAM are they used to call them soft skills. I think that underrates them. Transferable skills is my preferred expression. And I think particularly in the era that we're in now, having skills that where you can change jobs, it's going to be, or industries that you work in, it's going to be unlikely in the future that, you leave high school and you are in the same industry or have the same career for life. That being adaptable and flexible and being able to move is going to be even more important. And I think that's what STEAM does.
And I think that leads nicely into my next question, which is, we've heard this new government talk an awful lot about focusing on reading, writing, and arithmetic and this hour a day business they seem quite excited about. My view is that it's infinitely possible to advance the learning of those three core subjects while you're also learning about science, technology, and all of the amazing creative skills that you're just talking about through project-based learning and integrating all of these aspects. What are your thoughts on that?
100%. I mean, I've seen it. It's it's just not linear anymore, right? The world is not linear. And if you watch a classroom of kids doing project-based learning, they can go to the tool that helps them work the thing out the way that their brain works, rather than thinking that you're going to have 36-year-olds in a class who are all going to learn the same way. The world doesn't work like that. And I think, obviously literacy and numeracy skills are really important, and they're really important for brain development as much as they are for anything else. And I remember when we were working in the sports industry, used to think about the development of physical skills. If you had them, you had to have them nailed in by the time they were 7, or else, some of those neurons were locked in and you were lost. Equally, we were talking before about, keeping their mind open, that sort of freedom to explore and discover things in a way that is exciting and helps them to learn. That's what the project-based learning or STEAM approach does. It's learning in a world that the children are living in, and that the things that they're seeing, the things that they're hearing, the things they're experiencing, it's taking that into the classroom and putting that together with, the great stuff that a teacher does, and helping them to get those subject outcomes, but in a way that works for the majority, not for your linear learners.
Thanks for agreeing with me on that one. So moving into talking about tertiary education, which we're both pretty hot on at the moment. First up, I know you recently wrote to the Minister. Do you mind sharing what your kind of core message to her was?
Yep, so we wrote to Minister Simmons, who's the Minister for Tertiary Education. She's also got responsibility for the workforce development councils. And our concern there is some of the things that are being said in government about the workforce development councils, and how we can readily go back to pre-workforce development councils and pick up the industry training organisations. Well, the answer is creative and tech can't, because we didn't have one. So there's nothing to go back to. I also think that there's a couple of things particularly about Toi Mai, which is the Workforce Development Council for Creative, Cultural, Tech and Recreation. There's something that it does differently that we didn't have either, and it's a whole heap of research and insights about our industries and the connection that they sustain to industry, which is not necessarily the same as the system or the framework that existed before. So even if it can't exist as Toi Mai, we need something that is industry connected, that is able to keep up with how we move. I had because we've lost the regional skills leadership groups as well, and I was a member of the tamariki one. The only person flying the flag for the work of the future rather than our more traditional industry. I was like a stuck record. But even with that, we saw the functioning of some of the government agencies in the education space where you're like, okay, well, you can apply for that now, and we'll take 2 years to approve it, and then we'll think about what we're going to do with that in the future. I'm like, but the opportunities now, we need to be able to offer those skills now. And then, of course, they'd come back with the latest education buzzword, we'll have a micro-credential for that. I'm like, okay. We just need the system to be able to evolve and move as fast as the industry is moving in some way or another that helps it to keep up. And I know that that's not easy for government to do that. But for industry success, which obviously then is New Zealand's success, we've got to find a better way of doing it.
So let's keep talking. Yeah, well, let's keep talking about Toi Mai for a bit. So declaring my conflict, I was on the establishment board for Toi Mai, and I thought it was brilliant bringing creative, culture, recreation and technology together into one workforce development council. But that is my conflict, that I was involved in that. But bring it all into one umbrella to focus on vocational education pathways. And my personal view is that the workforce development councils were working well, and you've just described a way they were working well from a research and insights perspective. I also felt they were working really well as a conduit for engaging industry and connecting industry with the vocational education system. And I would have liked to have seen their remit extended into tertiary, because I don't see that same level of connection happening at a tertiary level. Do you share that view for your industry?
We share it and have a mechanism for working with it. And I don't have to declare a conflict, but We Create has to declare a conflict, because the lovely Victoria Blood, who used to be the chair of the Music Commission, who works with me on We Create strategy, was involved in the Rove process that led to the development of Toi Mai, of the workforce development councils, including Toi Mai. And at one stage, creative and tech were in with engineering in that process. And we had to fight really hard to get a 7th workforce development council that was more future focused. So acknowledging the work that was done again by industry to lead that conversation, and obviously acknowledge people in government who recognised that it was the right thing to do. Around that process and in conjunction with it, we have a group we call Createur, which is our Creative Tertiary Educators Network.
Nice.
It involves people from both the universities and from vocational education and private training establishments that operate in our world as well. That is about connecting the educators who are doing the work, and for them to then have a vehicle to come back to us to include in our own advocacy. And actually recently they've started advocating on their own behalf as well, which is awesome. But that's not the same as the system changing. And I think that's more what you're pointing to there, Vic. I know with particularly with interactive media and the creative tech parts of our joined up worlds, things like degree level apprenticeships have been discussed, where it's one way of, that's a very happy smile. I think you've had that thought before. It's a way of keeping a learner up to date with technology, that because the business can afford to sustain the technology, which education institutions often can't. But then it's giving, academic credit for the work that's being done within the business. But again, it's a different approach. And I was interested, though, that one of the other organisations on the Regional Skills Leadership Group in Auckland, within the construction sector, and they were actually interested in something similar. So again, keeping people in work and learning on the job while getting a tertiary level qualification. It's an interesting approach.
Well, that's really cool to hear, because construction already has apprenticeships, obviously, at the vocational level. TEC did dedicate a great deal of their BIM to talking about, their briefing for the incoming ministers, talking about degree level apprenticeships. And I've been to many meetings in the last 2 years on how do we get this model off the ground here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So there's a lot of talk going, it's just the action is what we're all waiting for. Mark from our audience has got a couple of questions for you. Do you think WDCs should be better resourced to enable a more responsive industry standard setting and forecasting of workforce needs? So it's a difficult one to answer given the minister signalled that she's going to shut them down.
Look, I think even if she's going to shut them down, the workforce planning is, again, something that I almost have sympathy for the government on here, because the industry itself can only predict so far out because of the development of technology. So would we like it to be better and work for us better? Absolutely. Have I seen a model where it's being done well? No, I don't think so. When we look for examples of where government and industry are working well together around things, including workforce development, we generally look to the UK because of the approach that they've taken with the creative sector, where it's been embedded across all government agencies. They have to think about the creative sector and their policy development before they can adopt policy. They haven't solved this problem, but they do have much better research. The research there is better funded and coordinated, that enables these sorts of things to be better informed than what we have here.
And one of the questions I was going to ask you was, do you have other thoughts on how we solve the industry education integration challenge? And it sounds like as a sector, you've already gone a long way towards that by creating this initiative where you're bringing the private training enterprises as well as the government funded tertiary sector together with the industry. Do you think that's a template that I should look at for digital tech? Because that's one of the biggest complaints I get from employers is the students that the learners or akonga that they consume aren't work ready, and how do they get more influence into what they're studying and what they're learning? So do you think that's a model we should be considering?
Yeah, I don't think there is one right model. And I think that is, it is quite challenging. The upper secondary side of things, I think, is difficult. And I know that there are some schools who have, local businesses who come in that work with students in, years 11 to 13, and give sort of a business perspective, and that helps engage learners with what's happening in business. But from my understanding of the secondary school system, quite often by the time they've come to year of 11, they're sort of committed, they're on a track. It does feel very early to be determining what you're going to be doing in this day and age, and not to have necessarily explored multiple opportunities of what is available and what is possible. And also, I think that, it's all very well to say that the, employers should do that. Well, they've got businesses to run as well. And I don't know that, that the education system and the business sector, need to find a way of leaning on each other that doesn't undermine what both of them need to be doing in their core business. So I think it's easy to say that should happen, but how you make that happen in a way that's fair for everybody, I don't know that we've got an answer to that. I think a lot of what gets missed in terms of education and re-education in the creative sector is what's done by our membership organisations. They do a lot of skills and capability development that sits outside the mainstream education system. If I look at the New Zealand Society of Authors, they have a massive program of work like you do for your members, where that's membership funded. It's not education sector funded. It's not necessarily acknowledged in the same way as getting some sort of qualification out of the mainstream education system, and yet it's still obviously massively valued because they've got waiting lists for it and can't really resource it sufficiently for the demand that they've got. And of course, the great thing about that is it's being done within the industry. So it's being done by people who've got that knowledge and experience to and are doing it on a daily basis more often than not. So I think there's pockets of all sorts of examples of things where things are working well, but there's often not the, getting money out of the education system to do it differently somewhere else is not an easy thing to do. But hopefully we could set something up where we could, a bit of a sandpit, where we could explore how things might look a little bit differently. And if anybody's going to be good at trialing that sort of stuff, it's going to be the tech and creative industries, because, we're pretty good at
things change so quickly, don't they? Just quickly before we move off education, and I'm conscious of time, Mark has said that he's surprised the WDCs are being retired, but he's opened the door on the Te Pūkenga question. I wasn't going to go there, but as you know, as soon as I've got a question from someone who's listening to us, have you got any thoughts on the decision to break Te Pūkenga up?
Not really my space, other than being a very proud graduate of the vocational education system, and being an advocate for that sector to be strong. Not everybody's going to go to university. What vocational education offers is a lot of the training that will resolve the problems that the country has now. And I think it needs to be cohesive and well run for the benefit of our learners. And it felt like Te Pūkenga was a model that might do that. I worry that we're rolling something back without giving it a chance to do what it was set up to do. But yeah, my primary wish is for a strong vocational education system.
And I am also a proud graduate of, I was 17 when I decided school wasn't for me. I didn't want to finish year 13 or 7th form. Just got a bit boring and repetitive, and I went to Nelson Polytech, and there's so many people who follow that pathway, and I'm totally with you on the support and the love that I have for that sector. Just so important for us, and but it's getting so murky now, where polytechnics are offering degrees and universities are offering vocational education, and it's everyone's just competing for students without that clarity that used to exist before.
Yeah, and I think if we designed a system that was student-centric, we could possibly get different outcomes.
Very different outcomes, agree. Now, Mark had another question back on the IP stuff. What are your thoughts on IP rules? Do they need to be strengthened domestically or internationally to better protect investment in IP?
Do the rules need to be strengthened? Probably not. Does our ability to enforce those rules need to be strengthened? Yes. Whether you're an individual creator or whether you are, one of our major production companies that suddenly found their work on Google somewhere, your ability to enforce those rights is really limited. I had a number of cases I was involved when I was at copyright licensing, including one that involved Facebook and cultural IP, and being able to get either takedown done or any sort of meaningful reparation for the iwi that was involved was next to impossible. And then obviously it's, when we're operating in the digital world, we're operating internationally. Companies that can choose not to engage the enforcement side of things is really difficult. I think it would also be, it was useful to think about whether harmonisation would help, but I've decided that I'm going to stop having unrealistic goals. So I'm going to park that one because it's never going to happen. So we can see that through the WTO, right? The World Trade Organization. You're never going to get everybody to agree. So we've got to work with what we've got. So I think that, one of the things in education as well is we need people to understand IP from being both a creator and a consumer, and understanding the value of it. As I said before, if we're going to be a trading nation that's trading in digital products, then we all need to understand a wide range of IP.
I'm going to ask you one more thing because our time has flown by. But before I let you go, I just thought you could wrap us up with a few thoughts on what you think success will look like for the creative sector in Aotearoa if all of the conditions we've just discussed could be resolved.
I think the New Zealanders would talk about creativity not so much as a nice to have, but as something that they have access to and celebrate every day. We would be talking about it in the same tones as we do, other industries, and not thinking about it purely as a nice to have. I think we'd be celebrating it. We often talk in the sector about, and I can say this because I used to work in the sports industry, right? And I'm a sports nut. The TV in our house is on sport all weekend, Friday night till Sunday night. If we acknowledged creativity in the same way that we acknowledge sport, we'd be doing really well. One of the upsides of creativity is it comes with, massive export opportunity, and to sort of cement New Zealand's place in the world as well. And I think it's something that we have proven that we are good at and we could do a lot more of. And we're looked to for being unique in many ways, including our unique culture, and being able to tell those stories to the world, and for New Zealanders to have access to those stories, I think is really important for our future as a country. It really worries me that, with the things we were talking about before, like Warner Brothers Discovery and TVNZ, the telling of local stories, whether that's the books our kids are reading, or whether it's, the games we're playing or the movies we're watching, I think it's really important that we have our own stories, and then we can take them all over the world.
That's a fantastic last thought to end us on. Really, really appreciate your time, your insight, and your candor. And this was a great fireside chat, and we could have talked for hours. So thank you so much for joining me, Paula, and thank you everyone who has been listening to us live, and I'm sure there'll be others who watch this delayed once we get it up on YouTube. So I will say good evening to everyone, and ka kite anō.
Ka kite. Thanks, Vic.